Behold the ultimate power!
Shadow the Hedgehog is a 3D platformer developed by Sonic Team and released for the GameCube, Xbox, and PlayStation 2 in late 2005. Much like Sonic Heroes, Sonic Team again decided to move forward with a new game concept rather than develop a sequel to the beloved Sonic Adventure or Sonic Adventure 2. According to interviews with various members of the development team conducted prior to the game's eventual release, Sega and Sonic Team claimed they wanted to create a new type of game to appeal to a larger audience and expand the overall fan base, although I suspect they saw the success of more mature platformers like Jak 2 or Ratchet & Clank and thought they might give it a go. Unfortunately, unlike Sonic Heroes, Shadow the Hedgehog was almost universally panned upon release. Large websites like IGN scored the game a 4.9, which is bad on their 10-point review scale. GameSpot agreed, scoring the game a 4.8, good enough for a poor on their scale. Retrospectively, Shadow the Hedgehog continues to receive critical disdain. In a 2012 review, YouTuber Some Call Me Johnny declared the game terrible. In a 2015 video, Ant Dude noted Shadow the Hedgehog was probably the lowest point in the franchise. The biggest complaints against the game seem to be the inclusion of weapon-based combat, darker tone, alien enemies, and branching paths, requiring multiple playthroughs to see the true ending. Still, despite the poor reviews and new direction, Shadow the Hedgehog managed to sell over 2 million units worldwide, which was about the same as Sonic Heroes, meaning they failed to attract a larger audience. So, is Shadow the Hedgehog really a train wreck marking the dark ages of the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise? Let's dive in. Before the events of Shadow the Hedgehog, some backstory was given in both Sonic Adventure 2 and Sonic Heroes. Here, the character is introduced as a secret military weapon project, the Ultimate Life Form. After a military scuffle, Shadow is sent to Earth to live in cryosleep for 50 or so years. Eggman then awakens Shadow so the events of the game could unfold. The adventure concludes with Shadow sacrificing himself to save all of humanity. In Sonic Heroes, Rouge the Bat stumbles upon Shadow the Hedgehog, who is clearly not dead. Through this game, Shadow doesn't remember much, although Rouge the Bat happens upon a whole army of shadows near the end of the game. This brings us to the events of Shadow the Hedgehog. The game opens with Shadow unable to remember anything but a young woman named Maria being shot. Then, right on cue, dark clouds fill the air and aliens drop out of the sky. Shadow is surprised when an alien named Black Doom recognizes him and requests Shadow bring him the Chaos Emeralds as previously arranged. As this is the first living being seeming to know Shadow from 50 years ago, Shadow decides to comply with the requests in hope of learning about his true origins. From here, the game kicks off in Westopolis. Right away, two of the main gimmicks are introduced. First, there are either 2 or 3 mission choices in each stage. In Westopolis, for example, completing the mission presented by Doom's Eye will send Shadow down the Dark story arc. Alternatively, the player can choose to complete Sonic's mission, sending Shadow down the Hero story arc. Finally, the player can ignore both and choose the neutral goal. Depending on which mission the player chooses to complete, the story segment may be different and the next stage will be different. While structurally unlike the previous 3D titles, the storytelling is effectively the same. As the player replays the game multiple times, new elements of the story are revealed, giving the player a clearer picture as to what is going on at the various points in the timeline. But other than the 10 different endings, no other elements are incompatible with each other. But as the game is presented in a non-linear way, I'll save the rest of the story for later on, and instead move on to the gameplay. Generally speaking, Shadow the Hedgehog controls similar to the previous titles. He accelerates quickly, leading to a slippery feel, and turns like he is wearing ice skates, making it tough to dodge obstacles at speed. On the flip side, Shadow decelerates quickly, coming to a stop in short order. While the overall movement isn't what I would call precise, it functions well enough in the stages provided, and maneuvering through the game never requires more precision than the controls provide. While the movement is at times clumsy, the jumping is excellent. Once in the air, Shadow is slow and floaty, allowing plenty of mid-air control to land on the platforms with confidence. The jumping is so good I never found myself missing platforms and falling to my death, which is nice. What isn't nice is the homing attack. I have two issues with the homing attack. First, the move is very finicky on when it will actually work. If too far away from an enemy, it won't do anything, and the same goes for when a target is too close. Instead, there is a sort of middle ground the player needs to be aware of in order for the homing attack to actually home in on something. I also don't like how using the homing attack bounces Shadow straight into the air, rather than backwards. With Shadow straight above an enemy, it's a crapshoot on whether a second homing attack will hit the enemy or simply force Shadow to launch himself into some other direction. Much like Sonic Heroes, I found myself avoiding the attack unless absolutely necessary, meaning I don't really have many examples of this phenomenon. Thankfully, the homing attack is rarely needed as Shadow the Hedgehog has a wide assortment of weapons at his disposal. These are easy enough to obtain too. In a clever bit of game design, Westopolis showcases this perfectly. An explosion takes down a soldier, causing him to drop his weapon, which then features a yellow glow around it. This clues the player into the fact anytime an alien or soldier is carrying a weapon, they can be relieved of it. Weapons can also be found in crates marked with a gun. Between the enemies and the crates, there is almost always an assortment of arms at Shadow's disposal, making the homing attack shortcomings a mostly moot point. Actually using the weapons is also straightforward. There is no manual aiming, and really no aiming at all. Just face the general direction of the enemy and fire away. Like the homing attack, if the player is too close to an enemy or too far away, it won't register, meaning there is a middle ground sweet spot. But as the player isn't in harm's way, the annoyance level for a missed shot is fairly low. I should also mention there is an accuracy range for each. Weapons like the chain gun seem to work no matter how far away a target is, where the bazooka will only lock on at close range. It still feels like each weapon has a sweet spot where being too far away or too close causes ammunition to go in unexpected directions or miss the target entirely. Guns also fire at a different rate, do different amounts of damage, and have different magazine capacities. While there is a wide variety to choose from, the player is mostly relegated to just a few choices depending on the stage. When in a human area, a couple human weapons are available. When in an Eggman area, Eggman weapons are available. And when in an alien area, alien weapons are available. The varying styles of human and alien weapons reminds me of Halo in a way.
The aliens have decided to send in the best of the best!
Shadow also has a 3-hit melee combo, but outside of busting open crates for weapons, I never use this to fight an enemy. Moving on, Shadow the Hedgehog also features vehicles. This isn't totally new, of course, with bumper cars and go-karting being featured in specific areas of previous games. But here in Shadow the Hedgehog, vehicles are available within certain levels. These are optional too, allowing the player to simply walk past them when not wanted, or utilize them to speed past hordes of enemies in other stages. While the gunplay certainly gives Shadow the Hedgehog a different feel compared to the previous 3D installments, the overall level structure should feel familiar to fans of this era of the Sonic series. The level design is of the linear variety, with an obvious way forward and exploration limited to alternate paths rather than large areas to wander around. Forward progression can be hastened by correctly utilizing the homing attack to get across gaps, leaping from enemy to enemy, finding optimal routes through the levels, utilizing springs and speed ramps, and of course, taking advantage of grind rails and other level gimmicks. Occasionally, the player can utilize the spin dash to skip certain sections as well, rewarding skillful play, but racing through each level as quickly as possible to reach the goal ring will not allow the player to branch through the hero and dark stories to explore new stages and watch new endings. Instead, the player will need to eventually complete some of those side missions referenced earlier. These missions function just like the Team Chaotic story in Sonic Heroes. This might mean finding a certain amount of widgets or destroying all of the enemies on a given stage. There are also time-based missions, forcing the player to complete a task quickly, like reaching a destination or defeating a target. Like Sonic Heroes, not all missions are created equal. The two side missions in the opening stage, Westopolis, are a good example of this, with the Dark mission requiring a player to locate and defeat all 35 soldiers, and the Hero mission mission needing to be done with the 45 aliens. Both of these represent the low points in the mission-based gameplay. Despite playing through Westopolis 20 times and being familiar with every nook and cranny of the level, my heart would inevitably sink when I would reach the end of the stage and realized I had missed one of the targets. To its credit, Shadow the Hedgehog utilizes a terrific checkpoint system. There are multiple checkpoints per level, and each can be utilized to immediately warp to any previously seen checkpoint. This can be insanely helpful during the missions, allowing the player to warp back and shoot an enemy they missed, or explore an alternate route. This, of course, is most helpful when one realized an error was made. In the case of Westopolis, the player will likely need to warp back to the beginning of the level to find a missed target. Still, it's a great addition to the game and works well within the mission-based goals. Thankfully, not all missions require the player to destroy dozens of enemies. Oftentimes, the missions are far more reasonable. Locating cream and cheese gives the player just 2 things to find. A more standard number is 5. 5 secret discs, light 5 giant lanterns, and so on. The targets are generally large and impossible to miss, further reducing the sense of tedium or annoyance. Better still, some missions are simply an alternate exit, taking the player another minute or 2 deeper into the level, without any searching at all. Another fun mission type are the target missions. In Air Fleet, for example, Shadow needs to take down the President's plane before it reaches its destination. Same goes for Lethal Highway, having the player destroy an alien ship. While not the most original goals in the entire world, it's nice to see the developers actually put the weapons to proper use, requiring the mechanic in order to be successful. Before I forget, I should also mention the Chaos abilities. Killing good enemies will fill the red meter, representing a dark action. Killing aliens will fill the blue meter, representing a hero action. After filling either of them, the Chaos ability can be used. The red meter gives Shadow access to Chaos Blast, which is an offensive attack, destroying anything small in the blast radius and doing major damage to larger enemies. The blue meter gives Shadow Chaos Control. In this game, Chaos Control warps Shadow forward through the level, which is exceptionally useful when just speeding along, and less so when trying to complete an alternate mission. However, Chaos abilities have a third feature which is exceptionally helpful during boss fights. Much like the weapons, bosses can be alien in nature, Eggman creations, or military vehicles. Black Bull is the alien boss. In one instance, the player will need to homing attack off of enemies and then target the eye. In another version, the player will need to hit a spring and then grind towards the target. Both are exceptionally simple with easy attack patterns to avoid. Next is the Egg Breaker. The player will need to take down Eggman's robots and snatch their weapons to use against the boss. As Eggman never has an invincibility phase, these can be taken down in short order. Finally, there are the human bosses, Blue Falcon and Heavy Dog. These are functionally similar. The player needs to knock rockets off the machines and then use them to inflict damage. I do find it odd how there are effectively just 3 sub-bosses total, but they offer a nice change of pace to the main action stages without being overly long, and all properly take advantage of the new weapon-based gameplay. It is also during these where I learned how not using the Chaos abilities can be more advantageous than using them. Sure, the Chaos Blast is somewhat useful, but using Chaos Control to slow down time isn't. Once the meter is full, the player will gain access to invincibility as well as unlimited ammo. This adds a new dimension to the boss fights. After doing enough damage, the player will fill the meter, and with the unlimited ammunition, can finish most of the bosses off rather easily. The invincibility and unlimited ammo can also be helpful during the stages for sure, but against the bosses, the side effects are much more useful. In addition to the 3 sub-bosses are 3 final bosses. The 6th level of each path will contain a hero mission and a dark mission, each leading to a final boss encounter and of course a conclusion to the path's story. Like the sub-bosses, these also come in 3 flavors. There is the human boss with Sonic tagging along, an Eggman boss, and a fight against Black Doom. Eggman is in a machine called the Egg Dealer, a clear nod to a casino. Basically, the player needs to homing attack 3 different buttons on the machine, stopping the reels. If the player stops the 3rd reel, then the slot machine will harm Eggman. If Eggman stops the 3rd reel on his own, the player is attacked. Or if the slot machine doesn't get a 3 of a kind, nothing happens. As best as I can tell, the Egg Dealer is random, meaning sometimes the fight will go quick and other times it will drag on. If the player does have some sort of control over the slot machine, I never figured out how. Next is Sonic and Diablin. Here, the player needs to homing attack off of Sonic to reach the machine. However, the machine has a shield, meaning the player will need to wait for the shield to drop in order to inflict damage. Like the sub-bosses, the passive effects of the Chaos abilities can drastically decrease the length of this fight. Finally, there is Black Doom himself. He first has an offensive phase where the player needs to avoid a series of attacks. After this, Black Doom will have a cool-off period where the player can finally get in a 3-hit combo. Like most of the other bosses, there are some weapon crates lying around the player can utilize to also inflict damage. As a whole, the bosses are underwhelming. None require a great deal of strategy or skill to defeat, although none of the fights are frustrating either, and the encounters never wear out their welcome.
No, not Shadow Fever!
So, with the levels completed, missions accomplished, and bosses defeated, the player is treated to one of 10 different endings. In the darkest ending, Shadow defeats Sonic and announces he is going to destroy the whole damn planet. The player can also choose to betray Black Doom, and then Shadow will take things one step further and declare his intention to take over the universe. Moving towards the hero side of things, Shadow will get depressed, attack Eggman, or team up with Sonic to take out Black Doom. To be fair, none of the endings actually finish. That is to say, Shadow announces what he is going to do, but never actually does anything. This, of course, is because none of these are real endings. Like each of the previous 3D offerings, a final story is unlocked only after completing each campaign. In Shadow the Hedgehog, that means replaying the game a minimum of 10 times to check off each of the 10 possible conclusions. Completing this task will reveal the real conclusion to the adventure. Basically, the final story picks up right where the opening cinematic left off, where Black Doom commanded Shadow to obtain the 7 Chaos Emeralds. If one remembers, the opening scene also featured a newspaper page announcing the Fire in the Sky Festival, celebrating the 50-year return of the Black Comet. Curiously, 50 years ago is the same time period where the flashbacks in Sonic Adventure 2 take place. The player, of course, has collected all 7 Chaos Emeralds 10 times. Regardless of what Shadow said he was going to do during those 10 endings, he doesn't actually do any of them. Instead, the final story actually continues the narrative. Before giving the 7 Chaos Emeralds to Black Doom, Dr. Eggman, along with Sonic and friends, attempt to stop Shadow from complying. Black Doom then announces he does not want to destroy the Earth, but rather enslave the humans as a source of power, like in the Matrix. After the bad guy explains all of his plans to the heroes, because that's what bad guys do, Black Doom uses Chaos Control to bring the Black Comet from space to the Earth. Next, Black Doom finally reveals Shadow's past to him. Basically, Black Doom is retconned into the Sonic Adventure 2 backstory. Yep, alien DNA was utilized to help create Shadow the Hedgehog. All of that work for this tiny little nugget of Shadow's origin. After Shadow is momentarily depressed by the idea, Black Doom freezes all of the characters, and then Shadow breaks free, for reasons, and boards the Black Comet to destroy the bad guy. From here, the 23rd level is presented, the appropriately named The Last Way. This level isn't different from the previous Black Comet stages, only now Shadow must use Chaos Control to proceed. Thankfully, there are enemy generators allowing Shadow to fill the Chaos meter and perform the action. 8 minutes later, and Shadow catches back up with Black Doom and the story can continue. In case the player didn't get the hint, Black Doom spells it out for Shadow. He has the same blood running through his veins as Shadow. Next, Team Chaotix hacks the computer so Shadow can view yet another 50-year-old video of Gerald Robotnik. Here, he advises the Eclipse Cannon was created to destroy the Black Comet when it returned in 50 years. It is now up to Shadow to make things right. As Shadow goes on the offensive, Black Doom disappears, leaving the 7 Chaos Emeralds behind, which again makes little sense as he spends the entire game announcing how bad he needs these things. Anyway, with the Chaos Emeralds, Shadow goes super and the final boss fight begins. This final fight isn't much different than the final fights in the other 3D games, or the advanced games for that matter. It takes place in the sky, and the hero or anti-hero needs to use the powers of the Chaos Emeralds to take down the enemy. Here, Shadow can use Chaos Spear to break through a debris field surrounding Devil Doom, Black Doom's enhanced form. This is useful for hitting balloons containing ring containers needed to keep the super form going. Of course, this won't really damage the boss. Instead, the player will need to charge up the Chaos Spear. Once fully charged, the player can shoot Devil Doom's eye to do a much larger amount of damage. Every time Devil Doom is hit, he'll warp to a different part of the sky. And because time is of the essence, the player will need to make sure they are using charge shots to maximize damage and minimize time. As a final boss, Devil Doom is not hard, but the iffy shooting mechanics make things more difficult than necessary. It is difficult to hit the balloons, which contain the rings. Missing a few balloons will basically make the boss fight impossible, as less balloons are presented as the fight goes on. Hitting Devil Doom's eye isn't much better. I swear, half my charge shots went off to the side for no reason, or hit some other obstacle despite facing the right way. The whole thing feels sloppy and ends the adventure on a bit of a low note. Still, I wouldn't call it aggravating, and most gamers should be able to get into a good flow by the second attempt. With the final boss defeated, Shadow uses Chaos Control to return the Black Comet to space, which is promptly blown to smithereens by the Eclipse Cannon. I don't want to harp on this too much, but the Eclipse Cannon was destroyed in Sonic Adventure 2, and if at some point the Eclipse Cannon was fixed before the events of Shadow the Hedgehog, it seems as though it could have been used to destroy the Black Comet at any point. Maybe I'm missing something, but the entire ending feels a bit lazy to me. In any case, the humans now view Shadow as a hero, Knuckles chases after Eggman, and new Shadow says goodbye to the dead Shadow aboard the Space Colony Ark. And with that, Shadow the Hedgehog comes to an end, and the credits roll. Graphically, Shadow the Hedgehog is okay. Many of my complaints from Sonic Heroes hold true here, most likely because it's using the same renderware game engine. Polygon counts seem low, especially in the levels. Many platforms are made of basic geometric shapes, giving the game a dated feel. On the flip side, texture work is usually good. Texture resolution is almost always high, resulting in a crisp appearance. There are exceptions, of course, but they mostly do a nice job masking the low polygon count of the levels. Still, I can't help but feel like I'm always floating in space. A few of the levels actually feel like there is a living, breathing world surrounding Shadow, but oftentimes there is no ground at all, with platforms seeming to hover in an empty area. The simple level geometry and vast empty space make this feel more like a 1998 Dreamcast launch title than a late release Xbox game from 2005. Helping cement this feeling is the character animation. Shadow, Sonic, and the whole crew feature primitive animation, with the most basic facial expressions and postures. On my second playthrough, I began to notice just how lazy the cinematography really is. First, the characters' walking is always awkward, with their feet sliding around the ground and characters' progress not matching the walking animation at all. It's like a reverse moonwalk or something. Even more distracting is when multiple characters are on the screen, because only one of them is ever doing anything. If one is talking, the rest are all in an idle loop, with slight breathing and the occasional blink. Again, this may have been somewhat acceptable in 1998, but for a 2005 release, it looks very basic, and by 2017 standards, it's downright primitive. I should also note this Xbox version doesn't run as well as the GameCube version. Particle effects almost always make the game drop frames, which is a shame because the Xbox is more powerful than the GameCube, and the GameCube runs significantly smoother from what I can remember. Things usually hum along at 60 frames per second, but the frame skips are frequent. Perhaps my favorite graphical update is the lighting. There is a decent amount of bloom lighting and explosions and the sky. Even this green ooze seems to obscure shadow, giving a next-gen effect and putting the renderware engine to good use. Artistically, Shadow the Hedgehog is a little better. Like the previous games, Sonic Team seemed to strike the right balance between a fictional cartoon world while mixing in realistic elements like people. None of the humans look overly realistic, so the mixture of anthropomorphic animals, aliens, and people is never strange or awkward. This cartoon style carries over into the levels. Levels are mostly drab and void of color, but there are almost always highlights of color popping against the dark settings. It makes for a visually appealing game fitting the dark setting of Shadow's adventure, while still blending into the Sonic universe. The gun design is a mixed bag. The Eggman weapons are easily the most interesting, with exaggerated features matching the Mad Doctor's eccentric style. The human weapons are all very bland, and the alien weapons look like, Musically, Shadow the Hedgehog is also a mixed bag. About half the music sounds like generic rock. I have no problems with rock either, and the title screen of Sonic Adventure shows just how awesome a guitar string can sound. But this level of quality just isn't found in Shadow the Hedgehog, which is a shame. However, the other half of the soundtrack is, well, great. Digital Circuit features solid dance music with a nice catchy melody. The Arc features another high-energy beat, fusing techno with what sounds like distorted guitar strums. The Gun Fortress has lazy lounge music, and the slow guitar notes offer a nice feeling of tranquility, contrasting beautifully with the military surroundings. Black Comet sounds like something out of a James Bond movie, giving a fitting sound bed as Shadow races around behind enemy lines. The distorted rock in Lava Shelter is also pleasing, offering sounds far more complex than the generic rock tunes. Circus Park is like a mix of Vegas show tunes with classic circus melodies. Finally, Lost Impact has some haunting piano-based music. At times, it feels like two completely different games, with the music quality ranging from terrific to bland. I should also mention the title track and ending music. I Am by Crush 40 is an awesome rock ballad harkening back to Sega's late 90s arcade classics. Almost Dead by Power Man 5000 is a licensed track as best as I can tell. It also feels like a title track, focusing on the hero or villain, friend or foe themes offered during the game. Anyway, this plays when the player ventures down the dark endings of the game. Waking Up is an electronic track from Julian K and plays during the neutral endings. Honestly, neither the melody nor the lyrics really stood out to me. Chosen One is a soft rock track by A2, and as the title would suggest, plays during the hero endings. All Hail Shadow is a pure hero ending song, with some more awesome guitar mixed with power pop lyrics. Lastly, Never Turn Back plays after beating the final story. This is another amazing rock ballad by Crush 40, and it's a real shame it never plays during the game, because it's freaking awesome. So, with all of that out of the way, we arrive back to the question asked at the beginning of the video. Is Shadow the Hedgehog really a train wreck marking the dark age of the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise? To begin, I want to quickly touch base on the main complaints against Shadow the Hedgehog. Most obvious is the guns and weapons. Whether one finds this at odds with the Sonic universe or not, the simple inclusion of a new mechanic does not automatically make a game bad. As the series has previously used guns, such as Maria's death and Eggman's threatening Amy, it seems like a normal progression for this spin-off title. It's also worth noting there is an organization called Gun, and Shadow was designed as a weapon, so yeah. Next is the overall darker tone. Again, I must say offering a darker tone for this entry doesn't automatically make the game bad. Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 went to some pretty dark places in their respective stories, so I'm not certain where the angst comes from. Same goes for the aliens. Previous enemies include a god of destruction and a death egg, so I'm not sure how aliens are outside the norm for a game in the franchise.
To this planet over 2,000 years ago.
Finally, there are the multiple playthroughs required to get to the final story. Again, the 3D Sonics prior to this game all did the same thing, so I'm not clear what is so extra offensive here. It seems par for the course as far as I'm concerned. So, with those quibbles out of the way, let's take a look at some of the improvements Shadow the Hedgehog offers fans of the series. The most obvious improvement is just a single playstyle. There are no fishing stages, no mech shooting, no treasure hunting, digital pet raising, team gameplay, etc. Shadow the Hedgehog is a fairly focused platformer with just a single gun-based playstyle. Now, if treasure hunting was one's favorite element from the adventure games, they may be disappointed here, but I suspect most folks won't be bothered by the omission. Speaking of omission, there are no special stages or hub worlds either, letting me know Sonic Team might have actually been aware of past mistakes and maybe listened to player feedback. But perhaps my favorite part about Shadow the Hedgehog is how so much of the game is optional and in the player's control. Take these keys for example. Each stage has 5 hidden keys which can open a secret door. During my non-recorded run, this unlocked a vehicle in whatever stage I accomplished this task, but on my recorded run, I never found all 5 in a single stage. Thankfully, these are not needed to beat the game, just an optional side quest for a player looking for more things to do. Lost Impact has perhaps the most notorious mission found in the entire game, requiring the player to destroy 35 artificial chaos. I gave this an honest attempt twice and could never find all 35, which is kind of annoying, but it's also optional. On my recorded run, I just played around this mission, skipping it entirely. I love the fact the player can skip many tedious tasks. For example, on my 10th run through the game, I skipped the hero missions on both Westopolis and Glyphic Runes, because I didn't feel like tracking down dozens of aliens. Instead, I waited until Prison Island to finally follow the hero mission to jump down to the hero story arc and complete the 10th story. This flexibility made playing through Shadow the Hedgehog a relatively pain-free experience for me. For many of the 10 journeys through the game, I could simply race to the exit ring and ignore the missions altogether. In reality, the player will really only need to complete 2 or 3 missions on each 6-stage journey, meaning more than half of Shadow the Hedgehog is a speed-style game and not mission-based. In fact, of all the 6th generation Sonic platformers, Shadow the Hedgehog is probably the least frustrating. I rarely found myself swearing at the screen. Few missions exceeded 10 minutes, nothing is obtuse, and I never felt feelings of aggravation. Shadow the Hedgehog just doesn't make any egregious errors worthy of a bad or poor rating. However, I'm not about to declare Shadow the Hedgehog a good game either. While it fails to really do anything objectively wrong, it doesn't do anything exceptionally well either. Take the weapons-based gameplay. It is dead simple to use, and the aiming works within the basic controls of Shadow the Hedgehog, but the gunplay never elevates beyond basic. Enemy behavior is mostly idiotic, requiring simple avoidance maneuvers to dodge incoming projectiles. There are some indestructible boxes in some locations, like the developers maybe wanted the player to use these for cover, but explosions blast through these, nerfing strategy entirely. The lack of any sort of strategy in the combat really makes the gunplay feel like a wasted opportunity, and instead Shadow the Hedgehog feels awfully similar to Sonic Heroes. Not only is the combat extremely simplistic, the level structures are also exceptionally primitive. Going forward is the name of the game here, and outside of a few buttons here and there or enemies needing to be defeated before a door opens, there is very little to do outside of the core gameplay mechanics. About the only exception to this rule is the hero mission in Circus Park. Here, the player is actually challenged to utilize specific stage gimmicks to try and amass 400 rings. Bonus rings are awarded for going through flaming hoops, playing shooting gallery minigames and figuring out how to reach bells high above the playfield, in addition to not taking damage and losing rings. It's easily the most engaging stage in the whole adventure, and I wish this level of thought, challenge, and variety could have been implemented in other stages. Still, there is some fun to be had, and a couple more stages really stood out for me. Cryptic Castle offers branching paths, making exploring entertaining. Sky Troops offers plenty of platforming gimmicks like this little optional mech. The player can use it to make massive leaps up these vertical platforms, but it isn't required, and Shadow can traverse without it. Death Runes is another highlight, with plenty of high-speed grinding and precision platforming. Speaking of grinding, Lava Shelter features tons of it, and I'm pleased to report switching rails is a glitch-free experience. I never once got flung off a rail to my death, and instead was able to switch seamlessly from rail to rail, avoiding enemies as the designers intended. I also enjoyed how the level changes depending on the mission. If one follows the dark mission and destroys the cores, the lava rises, changing the player's path to the exit, which is cool. But for every fun level is something decidedly more mediocre. The cyberspace levels take a lot of control away from the player, having them press left or right to maneuver through electronic traces. All of the Black Comet variants also kinda suck, with the same hallways and paths repeating over and over and over. And then there are the usual gameplay wrinkles. Flying on these aliens is a real drag. Pressing the A button will speed them up, but then the steering is screwed. Instead of turning, the alien sort of dashes, making it controlled clumsily. The light speed dash is also wonky. If the player isn't facing exactly straight, Shadow can shoot off into an undesired direction instead of following the ring path. This can create some hairy moments over bottomless pits or cause one to miss a shortcut. I also can't help but feel the game lacks visual variety. While there are 20 different levels, set pieces are often reused, and outside of a few daytime events, Shadow the Hedgehog is overwhelmingly dim, making many of the environments feel very similar. But despite the abundance of flaws, nothing in Shadow the Hedgehog is game-breaking. Even after 2 playthroughs, I was struggling to find anything truly frustrating or aggravating. Shadow the Hedgehog just isn't a bad game. Even the camera, something Sonic Team never quite got right, is fine here. I was able to get it stuck exactly once after 25 hours of play. Just once. I do wish the player could move it up and down rather than in and out, but it's just rarely a problem. The camera moves in a logical way, pointing the player in the right direction or giving a proper view, rather than getting confused, forcing manual intervention. Now, I want to be careful as well, and not let my low expectations cloud my objective judgment. But honestly, Shadow the Hedgehog is not awful. I wish I got annoyed by how often Shadow says damn, but then I remembered Raphael shouting damn in the first live-action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, and I have to remind myself, to a 10-year-old kid, this is kinda cool. I wish the 10 different endings created some plot holes, but the 10 endings don't. Shadow doesn't actually do anything in any of these, just shouts out some nonsense and the screen fades to black. These same inconsistencies are found in the other games, where boss fights are repeated with different characters being victorious. It's silly, sure, but does it make the game bad? No. Shadow the Hedgehog just fails to commit any real gaming sins. The game's lows aren't very low, and the game is considerably better than junk like Zathura and Bionicle, which feature far more repetition, far less depth, more troublesome camera angles, and worse gunplay. Those games are objectively bad. However, Shadow the Hedgehog's highs are never that high. Games like Scalar offer more depth in terms of game mechanics and level design, and Wallace and Gromit and Project Zoo offers vastly superior puzzles. Shadow the Hedgehog's puzzles are laughable. Boss fights never drag on, but they don't challenge the player either. And while I do appreciate the branching paths featured in many stages, secrets never require skill to get to. One just has to notice they exist. At the end of the day, Shadow the Hedgehog just might be one of the most overbashed games I've ever played. This is not some broken mess filled with glitches and poor controls. Instead, it's easily one of the most mediocre games I've ever played.